Hi, and welcome to Routing and Router State. This is section 5. In this first part, we'll talk about how to install the needed modules and how to set things up so we're ready to take advantage of the router state. So let's talk about the overall content of this section. So that means we'll talk about some topics that are bigger than this part, but it will give you an understanding of what information I'm trying to convey. The big picture. So first off, we're going to investigate what the router state actually contains so we know what information might be of interest to us. Secondly, we'll talk about what we can use it for. So this is all about motivation. Why should we capture the router state so we kind of understand how it can benefit us. Lastly, we'll talk about customization. No application is the same. Different applications have different needs. So for that reason, sometimes it can be really beneficial if we can customize what gets saved down. So let's now go to the content of this part. Let's talk about the libraries that we need to install for this router state to be captured and how we can investigate the router part. We will also cover what we need to import from those libraries and how to configure and how to set everything up so we are ready to start using router state. So now we're inside of appmodule.ts, and as we can see here, there are some modules of interest and there are some libraries in which these modules live. This will also give us the information needed so we know what libraries we're going to need. All the time when we're working with NGRX, we're always going to need this at ngrx/store. And today in this demo, this is no different. We're going to need the store module. Here's the new library that we're going to need to install called the router-store. From there, we're going to need a module called store router connecting module, and we're also going to need a router reducer function. We will be needing the Angular router because this is about router state, and that means we need a few routes set up. We're also going to need the store devtools library and especially the module store devtools module. Yes, that's really about it. Let's have a look down below in the actual module configuration how we use this. So here we have the store module and we call for root on it, which we normally do to set up different states and try to pair those states with a specific reducer. So here there's nothing new, you know all about this, but the novelty, the new part here is this entry. So here we got the property router and we got the router reducer, and the router reducer is not something that we write, but it already comes from the router store library up here. So here we can see that this is just like adding any entry to the store module, but we let the router reducer implementation be produced by this library that we are installing. Here we can see as the next module to be configured is the store devtools, and we call instrument on it like we are used to do the setup. And we're setting a max age of 5, which means that we remember the 5 last entries or alterations to the store. Here we got the router module and we call for root on it, which means we are setting up routes. I mean, this is quite obvious really because we're trying to investigate the router state, so we need some routes. Lastly, we have the store router connecting module. This comes from our new library that we have installed, the router store. So this one ensures to be the glue here between the router module and the store module to make sure that every time a routing event happens, this thing gets captured and it's saved down in our store and on this router property. So this concludes the installation and the setup. The only really needed installation and setup in this part is the store router connecting module and doing this setup. So everything else is really optional, but for example, this is very needed in terms of being able to see what goes on, right? So we're able to see the debugging happening and the different events being emitted. For the sake of making the demo work, we kind of need to have some route setup. So in a sense, it may be optional, but it's kind of needed to have anything to operate on, right? Because otherwise we won't have any events being triggered, like, navigation events, which we are actually trying to spy on. Okay, so now we have fired up our application, yarn start, and we see here in a browser that our application runs nicely. We have a very simple application. We just have a title and a couple of routes, so we're able to shift between different pages. So let's have a look here on the right. We see our store and we are actively using our Redux plugin, and we can see that the store is firing the ng store init event. but also that the navigation event is being fired. So this is kind of interesting. So we can see here when we investigate the state that there's a lot of state placed on our router state, which is the state, if you remember here, that we set up, and we let the router reducer take care of that state. So the router reducer seems to be doing its job by populating this property. So let's try to navigate and see what happens. We do home and about, and we can see that different pages are being displayed. And let's have a look here on the right again, and we see that router navigation now contains /home, and router navigation also contains some more bits here. And we can see that this one is pointing to about. It's very easy to lose yourself here. Yes, here is /about. As you can see, the router property is pointing to a quite big object, and this is one of the things that we're going to try to customize later in this section to make sure that this is nice and readable, because right now we have so much information and it's very doubtful whether we're going to be using all of it, but that's for later parts, so let's not spoil that part of our section. Yes, so we have proven that we can install a bunch of libraries, configure those, we can fire up the app, and we can see that different router events are being emitted, and we're able to show them in our Redux DevTool plugin. So we're kind of happy here with this part.